Well, hello to you all once again and welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV. And as you can see, we've managed to spare a few minutes to get back into Classic Dirt Bike HQ after our spell in Northern Ireland at the two-day charity event. And I hope by now you'll all have had a chance to take a look at the racing footage from that two-day charity event, which raised over £31,000 for local charities. And who knows, maybe next year, if this is the sort of thing that you might be interested in, maybe you'll try and make the trip to that charity event in Northern Ireland in 2022. Now, as usual, coming up here on my channel, we have loads of classic dirt bikes to feature, and in the next week or so we will be heading out and about once again, and we'll be heading back down to the border town of Lockerbie for our second visit of the year to cover the Round 4 event for the Scottish Classic Motorcycle Racing Club. And you can see all the footage and the bikes, of course, from that event here on my channel, so look out for that. But until then, we are going back to the Terry Pickering Classic Dirt Bike collection, and we're going to take a look at another one of Terry's machines in his collection, and this time we'll take a look at his 1985 GM250 Maico. Now, this featured bike of Terry's is just one of only a couple of machines that he has in his collection that hasn't been renovated or restored in any way, and this bike was just part of a trade deal that Terry acquired as a little add-on during a business transaction that he negotiated a few years ago. Now, the bike is a 1986 250 GM Maico and not an 85 model, as I previously mentioned, and Terry's done absolutely nothing with this bike since he acquired it, and it's still basically as he brought it home to his collection some years ago. Now, normally in the past, Terry either builds bikes from component parts, or he then buys old dirt bikes as running wrecks and then fully refurbishes them into as brand new condition. But this old GM250 is just one of the bikes that Terry hasn't touched at all since purchasing it. Now, going by the previous rider's name that's stamped on the bike's front and both side panels, it appears that this particular GM250 was ridden by Mark Wilde, who I know absolutely nothing about, but maybe if Mark's watching this particular clip, he could leave a comment or some information about his time with the bike. Now, of course, these 1986 Maico GM250 motors are basically the older 83 air-cooled bottom end with a water-cooled barrel and head added on top. But as 1986 motocross 250 engines go, these old GMs were still quite a decent power plant, and as I remember, I think they pushed out around the 49 to 50 horsepower range. Now, they still had the Maico 5-speed gearbox and a wet multi-plate clutch that was now connected to the crankshaft by way of a gear and not by the more older primary change system that you found on the earlier Maicos. Now, once again, this engine was fed its fuel by a big 54 Bing carburetor and reed valve block. Now, despite what some people think about these old carburetors, they were still well suited to these Maico motors. You just had to take your time and experiment with different types of jets and mixture settings to get them running just right. Now, the front end on these bikes again was quite good, fitted with these 4054 multi-adjustable white power upside down suspension systems, which were not only fitted on these Maicos in the 1980s but to many other off-roaders, including the likes of KTMs and Husabergs, to name just a couple. But they were a very good suspension system and pretty tough and were, as you know, manufactured in Austria. Now the story goes that White Power Suspensions actually took its company name from the supplier of its coil springs, which were always painted in white, and because the coil spring supplier was actually a hospital bed manufacturer and white was the only colour they had, that was when Wim Peters, or WP, founded the company in 1977. Now the rear single shock was this time a Swedish manufactured product, and this was Öhlins who supplied most of the rear shocks for these 86 GMs. But these better quality rear shocks were more than likely chosen by Maico because many of the earlier single shock bikes from 1983 onwards did have a tendency for the factory fitted corticoso units to just snap in two every time they had a sniff of a bump in the track, and I think that's why Maico was certainly taking no chances with these new 86 models. Now during the 1970s and 1980s, almost all of the motocross manufacturers did have a name for their rear suspension systems on their bikes. Honda of course had their Pro Link system, Kawasaki had their Unitrack, and even Suzuki had their full floater suspension. So Maico had to come up with a title for their bikes' suspension systems, and they named it the Twin Link 2, which sounded quite snazzy, but in reality it wasn't as good as the Japanese Big Four. Now this featured GM250 of Terry's is still in quite good original condition, although some parts on the bike, including this rather nice stainless steel exhaust expansion chamber, is not a standard fitting part from 1986, but nevertheless it's a very well engineered replacement, as you can see, although the actual name of its manufacturer is unknown to me personally, but as I said, it's a nice piece of kit. Now the bike's alloy tailpipe again is not original, but it's a very high quality substitute from American manufacturer FMF Racing, who are still regarded as among the world's top manufacturers of motocross motorcycle exhaust systems for two-stroke racing bikes. Now because this is an 86 GM250, it's of course fitted with hydraulic disc brakes on the front and at the rear, and actually this, they say, is quite a good way of identifying which particular model of GM Maico you have, because the 1984 250s and 500s had both drum brakes on the front and at the rear, whereby the 1985 GMs of the 250s and 500s had a front disc brake and an older drum brake at the back. And in our case right here, these 86 bikes of course have both a hydraulic disc brake on the front and at the rear. So whenever you come across one of these older GM Maicos, this is quite an easy way to try to figure out what particular year the bike is. But that's of course unless the owners put non-original wheels and brakes on the bike, which could then of course make it quite difficult to identify in that case. And once again, all of these GMs of course had these plastic fuel tanks, which almost all of the 1980s motocross manufacturers were using at that time, and Maico was certainly no different in that respect. And as far as I can recall, I think these fuel tanks held about 10 litres or just over 2 gallons of gas. Now again, the Maico's seat was placed partially up the back part of the tank to enable the rider to shift his weight forward when making sharp turns. Now again, the bike's handlebars and controls are not from 1986 as you'd expect, and those handlebar guards were more than likely fitted by its last owner or rider Mark Wilde to just guard against his knuckles being pelted with stones if he ever found himself not running at the front of the pack. But as I said, the bike is basically as Terry acquired it years ago, and since its purchase it's just sat in the corner of Terry's massive collection of old race bikes, awaiting its few minutes of fame here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. But I'm really just assuming that Mark Wilde was the last rider of this bike, going by these number plates, and as I said, neither myself or even Terry know nothing about Mark or the bike. But if you do know him, or maybe you are Mark Wilde watching this clip, then just feel free to leave some background on yourself and the bike in the comments section at the bottom of this video. But at the time these GM Maicos came out in the later 1980s, the once legendary name of Maico was of course in a very dire state, with various attempts to resurrect the golden days of the 1970s and early 80s, when Maico were king of the hill, when they peaked with the legendary 1981 490 Mega 2 twin shock bike, which is still regarded by many as the greatest motocross bike ever made. But these GM250s and its bigger brother, the Big 500, were certainly not the worst motocrossers of the 1980s period, because they still had quite a decent frame and a reasonably competitive motor that was powerful and reliable. But with all of the boardroom bullshit and family infighting that was going on with lawsuits and other legal stuff, the once great name of Maico was certainly no more, and it wouldn't be too long before Maico would lose its crown to cheaper, quicker and better built Japanese competition. Although I have to say that this 1986 250 of Terry Pickering's is still a quite nice example of one of these later GM Maicos, and as I said, this bike is still in basically the same condition as Terry purchased it back in the day, and it's still ready to race, although the dreaded rust and corrosion are beginning to take a bit of a hold on the bike now. But who knows, this would still make a fantastic restoration project for Terry in the future, because very few of his bikes are in their standard original patina, because almost every machine that he has been put back to better than new condition. And who knows, this fine example may be next on Terry's list. Well, there you have it, another nice looking machine from the Terry Pickering classic bike collection, and that's just one of the many machines that we're soon to feature here on my video channel. So please, if this is the kind of bikes that you like to look at here on YouTube, then maybe you will consider subscribing to my channel. Okay, next up on my Classic Dirt Bike TV channel, we will be heading back down to the border town of Lockerbie in Scotland to cover round 4 of the Scottish Classic Motorcycle Racing Club's 2021 Championship. Now you can see all of the bikes and of course every single race from that event here on my channel. So I do hope you'll rejoin me to take a look at that. But until the next time, everybody, continue to be safe and well on your old classic race bikes, until we all get together once more to talk about more vintage iron right here on your #1 Classic Dirt Bike TV channel.